Hello readers, it's Sasha, and today I am going to talk to you guys about all of the books that I read in 2021 that really could have been something, but were not. I have broken this down into 4 categories. So the first category is like my 3 stars, like my meh books, the books that I probably will forget that I read and that really could have been something but simply were not. And then I have my 2 stars and 2.5 stars. So those are the books that I don't know really how to classify this category. Like they're books that I obviously didn't like, but they weren't the worst books of the year. I have DNFs that, I have very little interest in picking up, books that just really didn't work for me and I couldn't even get through them. And then finally I have my 1 star, my least favorite of the years, like my least favorite books of 2021. So grab a snack, grab a drink, let's go through this list together. So I want to start by going through like the best of the worst. So we're going to start with my 3-star category, the category that really could have been something if, it had done anything differently. So my first book in this, the one that really was closer to 3.5 than 3, however I did have to round down, was Nick and Noelle's Christmas Playlist by Cody Hall. Super cute. It was a great little Christmassy romance. I guess great is a little bit not really a word. It was a romance, Christmassy romance. There was some smut, there were some like cute little moments, but overall, like I'm definitely gonna forget I read this. Like by next Christmas, like catch me adding it to my TBR again because I'll be like, oh my god, a cute new Christmas story. No, there's nothing memorable about it other than all of the characters having like Christmassy names and me being like really annoyed by that. So it really could have done more, and I think the premise and the writing was okay. So I feel like it really could have done something, but it just didn't. Next, I have Of Ice and Shadows by Audrey Coulthurst. And this is a sequel to Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. And this is a fantasy duology where a princess is betrothed to a prince but ends up falling in love with his sister. So obviously, going into the first book, I, didn't really know where I was going to sit. Fantasy was hit or miss for me at that point. I loved the first book. I thought it was so good. And I think I gave it like a 4 or 4.5 in 2020. So then when I picked up the sequel in 2021, I expected nothing less. I expected it to be perfect. And unfortunately, it really just wasn't. It really just like did nothing for me. The writing, it almost felt like it was written by somebody completely different. Like the story could have been something really special, especially because it was the conclusion for this duology. I feel like it could have gone so much better, but it just really missed the mark for me. Next, I have The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. As a whole, I liked the series. I thought it was like pretty good, but this particular book is my least favorite. It was good. I was intrigued, I guess, for a little bit, but overall, it just really like didn't add anything to the fantasy genre, and I just felt like really like meh about it. But obviously, as the series went on, I liked it more. But yeah, the first book was just like very dry, I guess we could say. And I don't know. It just wasn't my thing. The next book I want to talk about is I'll Be the One by Lila Lee. This book could have been so much more. Literally, thinking about what this book could have been is making me so sad because there was just so much potential. Like K-pop groups, plus-size main characters, mental health issues, sexuality, like it had the recipe for a perfect book, but unfortunately the writing was just very immature. The characters were forgettable. I don't really remember them that much, and I feel like for something like that, for a book that, could have meant a lot to a lot of people, and definitely did for some people, but I just feel like it really missed the mark for me. Next is The Silent Wife by A.S.A. Harrison. I don't really remember anything about this book, so I figured I'd put it like somewhere in the middle because I didn't really remember anything like super negative about it, but I also just like don't remember anything super positive about it. I think what I remember is that there's cheating and that this wife is like trying to kill her husband potentially because he cheated on her, and I guess potentially that's what happened. Honestly, like I read it not even that long ago and I don't remember it, so clearly it wasn't that great. It could have been so much more. It's a unique premise. It's not unique, but like it's an interesting premise, and given the right hands to write it, I feel like it could have been something special, but it was not. Next, I have The Devil's Thief by Lisa Maxwell. This is the second book in the Last Magician, I think it's called, trilogy. And considering the first book was like, and it was so good. It was so amazing. The vibes were immaculate. The story was great. Considering all of that was in the first book, I was really expecting great things for the second book, and I was let down. This book was really boring. And like, I don't find many books boring. I feel like I don't. Like, I genuinely feel like I'm pretty good at picking out the interesting parts in books. I'm pretty good at picking my reading taste, so I won't read something that's boring most of the time. But this was actually like really boring. But I wanted to keep with it because, of course, the series is you know, very popular, and it has everything that I look for in a fantasy, like historical fantasy, great things. Like, I guess there wasn't really that much, but like, yeah, I was missing a lot for me in that second book, and it just really let me down. But it wasn't like bad. It was still like an okay story. The storyline kind of flowed well, I guess, but like overall, really just could have been so much better than it was. Next, I had The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. This is a more recent read for me where a scientist creates cloning, and her husband, who is also a scientist, creates a clone of her and is cheating on her with this clone of her, which in retrospect, great concept, like really interesting concept. I just genuinely don't think I'm gonna remember this book in like 4 months time. Like, I'm literally just gonna be like, oh yeah, that's a book I read. It might be because I'm not a sci-fi heavy reader, but I genuinely just don't think that the writing was like that great. And I know the story is like not supposed to be believable, but there were some parts where I was just like, okay, this is enough. I don't know, it was like if someone cloned somebody tomorrow, we would be like, what the hell? Like, that's insane. So yeah, it was a little bit weird, but yeah, I put it in like middle of the list because I feel like it was good, but it wasn't anything to write home about. These last few were like a lot closer to being like 2.5s than 3s, but I would round out to 3 because ultimately something won me over. First one I want to talk about is Graduation Day by Joelle Charbonneau. This is the conclusion to the Testing trilogy, and overall the series was okay. It was a very stereotypical YA dystopian story, and dystopian is always like one of my like low-key favorite genres. Like, I just love reading dystopian stories. I find them so fun. But I feel like this series, this conclusion let me down so much, and it wasn't even that I loved the Testing series because it wasn't amazing. I think the first book I gave 4 stars, the second book 3.5, but this book, I just felt like as endings go, this just like wasn't it. And I was really let down by it. And I almost gave it a 2.5 stars, but at the end of the day, I rounded up because I did feel like there was still some plot and I liked the character progression and where it went, but it wasn't great. Like, I just feel like maybe the duology would have been good. We don't need a third book. Maybe we could have ended it, but I was just like a little disappointed. Next, I have European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman. This is the second book in the, I don't even know what it's called, series by Theodora Goss. Theodora Goss is an amazing writer. I'm not going to take that away from her, but this book was so unnecessarily long. Like, I got so much description of like hillsides and the fireplace looked like this and like all this stuff, and I just feel like as stories go, it just didn't need to happen because we're taking away from what this story was, which was about a bunch of historical figures from like old novels like being real. Like, there was Sherlock and Watson. There was Jekyll and Hyde. But like, it just took away from all of those like actual really cool parts of the story, and it was so long. It was like so unnecessarily long. I didn't like it, but like it was still like okay. Next, I have Influence by Sarah Shepard and Lilia Buckingham. I don't even know. I don't really remember anything about this book other than it being like about a bunch of like spoiled rich influencers, and then one of them dies or like doesn't, who knows, and it's all told in like 4 different perspectives. And overall, I just felt like this concept is overdone, and this did not add anything to the overdone concept. If I could go back in time, I probably would choose not to read it because it didn't add anything to my life, and it's kind of just one of those books that you're just like, oh, I read that. Cool. Next, I want to talk about Pretty Dead Girls by Monica Murphy, and I put this lower than Influence because this one had a lot more promise than Influence, because this is about popular girls in town coming up dead. And this one girl who is a popular girl, she was like, oh, fuck, like that might be me. Gotta watch out, gotta watch my back. So yeah, like that overall premise was a lot more interesting. So when I went into it and I was let down, I was more let down by this because I actually felt like it was a little bit more original than Influence. So this book, it was fine, it was okay, but it did nothing for me. It wasn't what I was expecting. And overall, like all of the characters were just very unlikable and kind of whiny. And from what I remember, the writing, I don't think I gelled very well with the writing. So overall, not my favorite, and was very disappointed by that. Then I have Neighborhood Girls by Jessie Ann Foley. And this book is so very low on my list because this book, I expected a lot from it. I don't know why, because I don't even remember what it was about. All I remember, this is like a core memory in my brain. All I remember is this one scene where this girl literally leaves her house in like a negative 25-degree blizzard to go get a 7-Up from the gas station down the road. She ends up passing out from the cold, even though a cop like offered to drive her home, but the cop gave her like bad memories because he was like friends with her dad, and her dad ended up being like her dad was a corrupt cop. Yeah, so he was friends with her dad, and he's the one who arrested her. Or him. I'm getting confused. He's the one who arrested him, so she was like, no, I'm gonna walk home. And he was like, but like, you literally can't see anything in front of you. And she's like, but I'm gonna walk home. And then she did, and she passed out on some lady's doorstep. And then the lady brought her inside, laid her on the couch. For some reason, she saw this like botch job tattoo of Jesus that was on this girl's back, and they thought it was like Jesus crying, and it was like a miracle or something like that. No, and that should be enough for me to tell you why I gave that 3 stars and put it very low on my list, because what is that? It's such a core memory. Like, it's in my brain, and I think about it like at least like once a month. I'm like, that really, I read that and I didn't need to. So then I have Mirror Mirror by Cara Delevingne. I guess this is kind of a spoiler for next video coming out, but I gave this 3 star, closer to 2.75, because let's be honest, this really like didn't do much for me. Cara Delevingne can stick to acting and modeling. I feel like she's great at those things. However, writing is not her strong suit. I just found that this book was very unrealistic to what teenagers are, because even though like teenagers swear, I get that. I don't think you could go like 2 sentences without the F word, without shit, without bitch, without all this stuff. It's unnecessary. Like, it's unnecessary for all of that. Like, it's just not, it's not there. The characters were all unlikable. The writing was really, really bad. And there was like weird like things that people would say. I'd be like, nobody says that. No teenager says that. I'm not a teenager, but like I was not too long ago. So I feel like I kind of know what a teenager says, and it's not that. And I just didn't like this that much at all. So yeah, the ending is what made me round it up though to 3, because the ending I felt was really good. So, but overall, like not my favorite book I've ever read in my life. So, and then I have my most disappointing of the meh books. So that is Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper. This was almost a 2.75, 2.5 as well. However, I rounded it up to 3 because at the end of the day, the vibes were just immaculate. But you can't give me a concept of queer witches in a Halloween town-esque town and expect me to rate it anything less than 5 stars. So going into this, I was expecting everything. And there was a competition aspect. I was expecting greatness, and I was so let down. It was actually like, it hurt my feelings how let down I was. But 3 stars because of the vibes, but like it should have been less. Next, let's go into my 2-star category. So the category where I'm just like, I didn't like hate you. You weren't the worst book I read, but like you definitely were not good. And if I had the choice, I would rewrite you or leave you in the dust. So for that, the first book in that category is The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. This could have been something special if it weren't so negative toward fat people, but here we are. It depicted our main character as being this whiny, entitled fat person who just was, you know, so obsessed with her fatness that she couldn't get over that and like do anything for herself and kind of thing. And I was just like really not here for it. Our main character was so unlikable. And it's just like, I have definitely had moments where I wallow in self-pity. Like as a fat person, I do. But I still try to make something of myself. And this girl did nothing except wallow. And I was just like, I was really getting, I was over it. It was not good. So yeah, that's one book. Next, we're going down to The Serpent's Curse by Lisa Maxwell, aka the 3rd book in the series that I just mentioned, the Last Magician series. I had such great hopes for this series, and let me tell you, when I went into the 3rd book, it was so big. It was like 700 pages long. I was like, okay, there's got to be something in this book that's redeeming. The first like 300 to 400 pages were really, really good, and I was like, okay, here we go, like we're getting good. But then as it kept going and more unnecessary things kept happening and more drama kept happening that didn't need to happen, I was like, all right, I've had enough of this. The characters did nothing for me. Esta by the end of this was getting on my last nerve, and I don't know. It's just not my thing. I did not enjoy this series at all. The first book, it gave me such false hope. Like, I'm actually kind of pissed about it, but it's fine. Moving on to Cracked Up to Be by Courtney Summers. This book literally should have just been called How to Be a Bad Person and Mistreat Your Dog by Courtney Summers, because that's all this was. She was a bad person. She wasn't trying to improve herself in any way. She was just trying to get sympathy from everybody. Her parents got her a dog to try to like make her feel better, and boom, she gets it killed. So I hated that. I like genuinely hated that. I finished that while I was like on my honeymoon, while I was like not allowed to go anywhere because of COVID. So yeah, that was like a bad omen for my marriage. Like, Courtney Summers might have been the reason I get a divorce, but like, it's fine. Next, I want to talk about Redux by A.L. Davro. This book was a duology, like the second part in the duology, Nexus, I think it was called. And it was like a sci-fi story. I don't really remember much about it. However, what I remember is that the writing, it was like going into a different story. It was like going to somebody who had never written a book before, and they wrote the sequel to this. Like, the writing was choppy. The relationship was awkward. The vibes were just so incredibly off, and there were love triangles, which there weren't in the first one, and I was like, what the frig is happening? No, 0 out of 10. The first one was so good. I was really impressed with it, but this book, no, like, it just didn't need to happen. I was really disappointed. Like, thinking about it, I read it back in January. It's been almost a year, and I'm just like actually upset about it, so good job. And finally, the last one in this category, I feel like it had to be here somewhere, was The Mister by E.L. James. I did an entire vlog where I read this, and when I tell you I regret my life decisions, I do. This isn't like a horrible book. It's not like a 1-star hate my life book. It just was weird and like borderline on consent, and like had this weird, like, I don't know, I feel like E.L. James has like really weird dynamics between men and women, and I'm not here for it. And I didn't love this because I just felt like this girl was just like dependent on this man, and I just didn't love it. Now let's talk about the DNFs that I had before I get onto the worst books of the year. So these are books that I literally could not bear to finish. So are they the worst books of the year? Maybe. But the ones I want to talk about at the end are the ones I actually completed. First one I want to talk about is Shadow Kiss by Michelle Mead. Again, I am going from like best of the DNFs to like worst of the DNFs. So the best one is Shadow Kiss by Michelle Mead. This is the third book in the Vampire Diaries series. Vampire Academy. I don't know why it's the diaries, but yeah, it was the third book. It was fine, I guess. I don't know if maybe I was just in the wrong headspace to read the Vampire Academy at that point, but I just didn't love it. But I feel like looking back, I might actually enjoy it if I tried it again. So I might consider reading the series again and giving it another shot, but I had to DNF that one because it just wasn't doing anything for me. The next book I want to talk about is Dreamers Often Lie by Jacqueline West. This is a book about a girl who has a head injury and she dreams up all these weird scenarios where she's with her favorite Shakespeare characters. This book was like if someone put the wrong mushrooms in their salad and they ended up writing a book afterward. Like, it was so weird. Like, I couldn't get past it. It was just so bizarre. Like, the way that these Shakespeare characters were just coming and being like, yeah, bro, like, you're in the hospital, you had a head injury. Like, what is happening? Like, literally someone was like, oh, these mushrooms would be great in my greens salad, and then boom, they write this. I think that's exactly what Jacqueline West did. Like, I can't picture another scenario where this book came out. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Next is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, and while I definitely did not like this book and I have no interest in picking it up again, I can definitely see where the appeal would lie for some people, especially because this is a very queer, very historical fantasy type situation. I tried to read this and it just, the way that the writing was written really took me out of the story. I just feel like it was not written well, and the writing was choppy, and I don't know. It just wasn't it for me, and I feel really let down by it, so I had to DNF it. It was a Winer's Book Club pick, and throughout the entire live show, I was there, contributing absolutely nothing. If you literally see me, I was designing my tattoo with a tattoo artist. I was designing this tattoo with my tattoo artist. Like, I wasn't doing anything. I was literally on my phone, trying to be, really discreet. No. The next one I want to talk about is If I Ever Get Out of Here by Eric Gansworth. This is a book that I was reading for my Indigenous authors reading vlog, and while I think the story is really good and really important, I just couldn't connect with the writing, and I think it could potentially be because the protagonist of our story, our main character, was a 13-year-old boy, and that's just not what I want to read about at all. It's necessary. It's very important to have literature for young boys. It's very important, but for me to read it as a 22-year-old, I was like, you're giving me nothing. I have nothing here. So I ended up DNFing it. I don't think I'll ever pick it up again. I do think it's probably a hard DNF, but it's not the worst book. I think it just wasn't for me at all, but it's not the worst book. Then we have Love and War by Melissa de la Cruz. I will literally never pick this book up again. It's the second book in the Alex and Eliza series, and I don't know why I bothered to read that anyway, because Alexander Hamilton is not something I'm interested in at all. I don't know. I just wanted to be the cool kids and pick it up and be like, I've read it. The first one was okay. The second one was boring as fuck. The second book was so boring. I had to DNF it. I was like, I can't do this to myself. I promptly returned to library and went on my merry way. I don't even remember why it was boring. I think it was because Alexander Hamilton started turning into a whiny little bitch, which I feel like was bound to happen, but there was nothing for me in that book. I would not pick it up again. I wouldn't even, if someone was like, do you want to pick this up again, or do you want to lose a foot? I'd be like, let's contemplate pros and cons of either, because it's not just an obvious choice. So yeah. Next is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, and I can't believe I ever tried to pick this book up to begin with. This is a woman who is profiting off of the traumas of a minority group, and, that she's not in. So, I don't know. I've heard a lot of things about this book. I've heard that the trauma just, it changes you. I read 30 pages, 40 pages, and I was like, cool, we're done. I have no interest in reading this. And I'm not gonna ever pick it up again. I don't actually feel like supporting her as an author, and I don't feel like putting myself through that. I like reading to enjoy my books. I don't like reading to be depressed. I just feel like that doesn't make sense for me. So I don't plan on reading it again, and it definitely was almost the worst of the DNFs, but I had to go with the next one. So I had to go with this one as my least favorite DNF that I DNF'd, because what the fuck was this book? This book is called The Lies We Tell Ourselves by Robin Talley, and let me tell you, I've heard some things about Robin Talley as an author. I've heard that she really tries to profit off of marginalized groups that she's not a part of, and this, I feel like, is no exception. It's a white woman who's writing this story about a school that is allowing Black people into it for the first time in 1959, so like when segregation is still a very prominent, you know, part of society. And within the first 20-25 pages, I literally swear to God, the N-word and other racial slurs were used like 40 to 50 times. Like, people were just like chanting it and repeating it over and over again. The whole thing gave me like super sketch vibes. Like, while reading it, I was literally like my face made like I was stressed. So I had to DNF it. Like, I couldn't. And I also just got rid of a book by her where it's about like a gender fluid person, and apparently the depiction and the portrayal of that gender fluid person is horrific. So I would caution going into any Robin Talley books. That one has like a surprisingly good rating. I would really go into it after looking at some Own Voices reviewers, because the people I saw that rated it like 1 to 2 stars were mostly people of color. So I'd look into that before picking that up, and I wouldn't support the author if I were you. I'd potentially like get it from the library if you want to look into it, but I would just like not. If I were you, I would just like not do that. But yeah, that was just like the worst of the DNFs I had this year. I hated it. I like hated it. Like, it made me physically feel sick, so that's never a good sign. Next, and the last category, only has 3 books in it, are my 1-star books. This is the category I call I finished, but at what cost? Because I finished these books, but like, why? So the first book I want to talk about is like 3rd worst book I read this year, and that is The 12 Dates of Christmas by Jenny Bayliss. This book, the idea of it was kind of cool. The execution was horrible. It was so bad. The characters were so whiny. Every man she went on a date with was like the exact same person. Like, they had the exact same like bad boy, like kind of sporty, potentially single dad vibes. And I was just like, have some variety. Like, where's your variety? It's not here. It's just like non-existent. And then the actual like love interest person, oh my god, he was so whiny. Like, throughout the entire book, he was like, like, why don't you help me do this? And she's like, because I'm busy. And he's like, but do you not like me anymore as your friend? Like, I would have skipped town. This guy was weird. Like, he would call her and be like, can you like help me bake this thing? And she'd be like, I'm like super busy, I'm getting ready for my date, and I got this to do. And he was like, but like, I really need it. Like, bitch, I could go on and on and on, but I'll save it for the Winers live show, which will probably actually be up by the time this goes up, so I'll link it in the description. But this was a truly bad book. Like, I do not recommend this to people trying to find a book in the holiday season. Like, no. Next, number 2, the 2nd worst book I read this year was The Dark Tide by Alicia Jasinska. This book, oh, I don't remember much about it. I just remember it being about fantasy stuff where you have to have like a male sacrifice, and it's like sapphic, and I loved it.
I love that concept. I don't love the book. I love the concept.
But then the book came around and I read it and I was like, what is happening? I literally did not understand anything that was happening in that book. I read it and I was like, I don't get it. Like, there was no connection. Like, the story just like didn't flow. It was just like, and I was like, I have no idea what's happening. I'm not following anything. The relationship started feeling like really Stockholm syndrome-y. Like, I had concerns. And overall, people were like, oh, this is so good. Like, such a good story. No, it wasn't. It was so, I don't understand. It was so confusing to me. I was just like, okay, so the tide is here. What is happening? Like, there was no background either to why the tide needed a male sacrifice. And like, why the ocean was like alive. Like, there's nothing. There's nothing. Oh my god. Such a dumb book. So stupid. And then finally, the worst book I read this year. Easy. This was like not even difficult to figure out, but it was Conviction by Denise Mina. I think every whiner and I will be in agreement that this book collectively was like just a horrific experience, except the live show was one of my favorite moments of all time, which I'll link it down below if you guys want some laughs, some kicks. But honestly, the book itself, not good at all. There's this girl and she's listening to this podcast, and then all of a sudden she's like, oh my god, that murdered person, that's like, the death was like mysterious. Oh my god, like, I knew him. I know he would not kill himself. Like, obviously this was a murder. So she's like, I'm gonna go solve this murder. And she knew this person because she worked at a hotel and she would have her smoke breaks, and this guy would come out and have like a smoke break with her while he was vacationing there for 1 goddamn week. And she was like, I know this man enough to know that he would not commit suicide. He would not kill himself. And so she went on this like hunt with her husband's new mistress's his husband, who was just like crying in the fucking corner every minute. And she was just listening to this podcast and being like, yeah, that's so not Andrew or whatever his name was. And I was like, what is this book? It is so bad. And I think she's turning it into a series, and I just want to know why. Like, I want to know what possessed her to be like, you know what? This needs a follow-up. People care so much about what's happening to these two characters. No one cares. Like, literally no one cares. So that was the worst book I read this year, and it was truly horrible, and I feel bad for anybody who reads it, because it was like truly a horrible experience for everybody. Anyway, that's all I have to say today. I spent so long talking about so many books, but these are all the books this year that I felt kind of let me down. And considering I read 117 books in 2021, I feel like these few books I want to talk about, like 20, 30, whatever, I feel like it's not bad. I genuinely feel like this is a pretty good size, you know, could have been more out of what I read this year. I feel like I'm pretty happy with the ratio. But yeah, let me know in the comments below how you felt about any of these books. If you read them, love them, hate them, I would love to know. But like, don't come for me. If one of these are your favorite books, I'm sorry, but like, people have different reading tastes. Like, don't come for me in the comments. It's not gonna make me like your book anymore, so don't do that. Otherwise, feel free to hit that like button, leave a comment, and of course, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm trying to post more frequently because I really love posting and it makes me happy, but I post when I can. And until next time, bye readers!